The note shouldn't have existed yet, and somehow it was already waiting for me. I run a small, quiet cafe where the safest place in the world is behind the counter. Out in the seating area, people's eyes can find you too easily, and I've never been good at being found. Back here, the espresso machine speaks in soft sighs, and the clink of cups fills in whatever words I don't have. Most mornings, the cafe wakes up slowly. The kettle hums, the windows fog at the edges, and the air smells like roasted coffee and warm sugar. I wipe the counter in small circles and line up the tea tins so their labels face forward, because order feels like a kindness I can control. That's how the note started. On a slow afternoon, I watched a regular stare into their cup like it held an answer they didn't know how to ask for. I wanted to help, but I didn't want to make it a moment or a conversation or anything that would force me into the spotlight. So I wrote something small on a scrap of cream paper and folded it into a neat square. I called them Notes to Whoever Needs It, and I tucked them into a few tea tins at random. Tiny comforts, nothing dramatic, just reminders to breathe, to eat something warm, to try again tomorrow. I never signed my name because I liked helping from a distance, like leaving a lantern on a path and walking away before anyone could thank me. Soon, I began to notice the smallest shifts in the people who came in every day. Mr. Larkin stopped frowning at his newspaper quite as fiercely, as if a tight knot had loosened by a single turn. A tired-looking woman in a raincoat pressed a note to her chest before slipping it into her pocket, and her shoulders dropped like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Watching those quiet moments felt like lighting candles in a room no one knew was dark. Then came the rainy morning that changed everything. The sky was one long gray sigh, and the rain tapped the windows in patient rhythms. The street outside blurred into watercolor, and the cafe felt like a small island of warmth. I was restocking the top shelf, moving tins one by one, letting routine keep my thoughts gentle and organized. Earl Grey, chamomile, peppermint, jasmine. When I lifted the jasmine tin, it felt heavier than it should have, and I told myself it was just the leaves settling. I popped the lid and breathed in that soft floral scent that always makes me think of clean sheets and early mornings. I reached for the scoop, expecting only tea, only the familiar whisper of dried leaves. Instead, my fingers brushed paper. I froze so completely that even the kettle's click sounded too loud. Tea tins don't hold paper unless I put it there, and I never put notes in jasmine. I lifted the folded square carefully, as if it might crumble or sting, and unfolded it with my pulse thudding loud in my ears. The handwriting was looping and elegant, like it belonged to someone who didn't apologize for taking up space. It wasn't mine. not even close. For a moment, I just stood there in the hush of my cafe, holding a message I couldn't explain. And somewhere beneath my fear, a small spark of curiosity flickered awake, bright, steady, and impossible to ignore. I told myself it had to be a customer, because the alternative made my thoughts wobble in a way I didn't like. A sweet prank made sense, especially in a cafe full of gentle people who carried quiet kindness like a habit. Still, the note sat in my palm with a warmth that didn't match the chilly morning air. I read it again behind the counter, careful to keep my face neutral in case someone was watching. The words felt oddly specific, like they'd brushed right against worries I hadn't admitted to myself in years. Not big, dramatic fears, but the small ones that live under your ribs, that you'll be too much or not enough or seen in the wrong light. The cafe moved on around me like nothing strange had happened. The espresso machine hissed, milk frothed, the bell chimed as customers slipped in with damp umbrellas. I smiled, nodded, and handed over cups the way I always did, but the note stayed pressed in my apron pocket like a second heartbeat. By mid-afternoon, the rush softened into quiet. A couple lingered by the window. A student typed with headphones on. Mr. Larkin turned another newspaper page with his usual solemn focus. I tried to convince myself I could let the mystery fade, that I could keep doing what I'd always done, help from a distance and never ask for more. But the note felt like an open door, and I couldn't stop staring at it in my mind. If someone had answered my tradition, what did that mean? Was it just a playful echo, or was it something else? Something that had been waiting for me to notice? I tore a scrap of paper from the stack by the register and set it on the counter like a dare. My pen hovered, then dipped, and I wrote in my neatest, most careful letters. "If you're real, prove it," I wrote, and then I winced at my own boldness. I didn't want to sound rude, so I added a softer line beneath it. And thank you. My cheeks warmed as if I'd said it out loud to a stranger's face. I folded the scrap into a small square, opened the jasmine tin, and tucked it into the leaves right where a scoop would find it. The act felt intimate, like slipping a message into a pocket while someone wasn't looking. Then I closed the lid and forced myself to focus on ordinary things: stirring honey, wiping the counter, refilling napkins, anything that didn't feel like hope. That night, my thoughts wouldn't settle. I lay in bed replaying the texture of the paper, the elegance of the loops, the way the note had felt warm as if it had been held. I told myself no one would answer, and part of me clung to that, because an answer would change things. The next morning, I unlocked the cafe with my heart already leaning toward the shelf. I promised myself I would wait until later, until I'd brewed coffee and set out pastries and done everything sensible first. I checked the jasmine tin anyway. A new note lay inside, folded with almost smug neatness, exactly where my reply had been. My stomach flipped, then fluttered, as if my body knew before my mind could catch up. I unfolded it slowly, bracing for the world to tilt. "So you wrote back," it said, and I swear I could hear the smile in the ink. "And yes, you're overthinking, which is very on brand for you." The warmth rushed to my face, but this time it wasn't embarrassment alone. It was something lighter, almost like laughter. At the bottom, it offered a gentle suggestion for the day. "Step out from behind the counter once," it wrote, "even if it's only to water the plant by the window." I stared at that last line until my throat tightened, because the plant by the window was my daily awkward stretch, my safe distance made physical. No one should have known that. And yet the cafe around me hummed softly, alive with steam and morning light, as if it had been listening all along. By the third night, I stopped calling it a coincidence and started calling it a conversation. It felt safer that way, like labeling something gives you a handle to hold. After closing, when the cafe was empty and the chairs were flipped onto tables, I stood behind the counter with a scrap of paper and my pen, listening to the building settle into quiet. I wrote one question each night, nothing dramatic, nothing that would make my chest ache too much. Then I folded the paper small and tucked it into the jasmine tin, like I was feeding a shy creature that lived among tea leaves. The first question was the one my mind kept repeating. Why me? I almost added a question mark, but my hand stalled, like punctuation might make it too honest. In the morning, before I even flipped the sign to open, I checked the tin. I told myself I was only verifying the prank, only collecting proof. But the truth was, I wanted that warm, impossible feeling again, the one that made the cafe seem like it was leaning toward me. A new note waited inside, folded with almost insulting neatness. I unfolded it and felt my mouth twitch upward before I could stop it. Because you keep trying to be invisible in a place built for warmth. Then, beneath it, as if whoever wrote it had paused to sip something sweet, "Also, you're the one who started leaving notes, remember?" It wasn't an explanation, not really. It was a gentle nudge, like a finger tapping my forehead and saying, "There you go again." That's when I started calling it the teapot in my head. Not the note writer, not the stranger, not the mystery. A teapot felt harmless somehow, like it belonged among my mugs and kettles and quiet routines. And the teapot, it turned out, had opinions, kind ones mostly, but also mischievous, like it enjoyed catching me in the act of shrinking. So I made it a routine. Question at night, answer in the morning, no announcements, no proof offered to the world. Just me and a tin of jasmine tea having the strangest, gentlest conversation of my life. Some mornings I'd read the note and feel a soft warmth spread through my ribs, like the first sip of something sweet. Other mornings the note would make me roll my eyes even as I smiled, because it felt like it knew exactly where my thoughts liked to hide. On the fourth morning, the teapot suggested my first tiny act of bravery. Recommend your favorite tea out loud today, it wrote, and I swear the ink looked smug. Not the safest tea, not the most popular one. Your favorite. I stared at the note while the kettle warmed, my palms suddenly damp. Recommending tea shouldn't feel like stepping onto a stage, but for me it did. It meant offering a piece of myself, however small, and letting someone respond. When a customer asked, "What do you like best?" my throat tightened automatically. My old habit rose up like a shield. Deflect, smile, stay invisible. I almost said, "Anything is fine," like I always did, like my preferences didn't matter. Then I remembered the teapot's teasing tone, and I forced air into my lungs. "I love the jasmine," I heard myself say, and the words sounded surprisingly steady. "It tastes like a soft morning." The customer blinked, then smiled like I'd handed them something more than a drink. "That sounds perfect," she said, and when she took the first sip, she made a small, happy sound. Something in my chest loosened, as if a knot had quietly untied itself. After that, it got easier in tiny ways. Not easy like flipping a switch, but easy like learning a path through tall grass. I began to notice how often people asked for guidance, and how rarely I offered my own voice. The next day, the teapot asked for flowers. A small vase on the counter, it wrote, "So people remember beauty doesn't need permission." I found an old jar in the back, rinsed it until it shone, and placed a few pale blooms inside. Nothing dramatic, just a soft pop of life against the warm wood. When I set the jar on the counter, I felt oddly exposed, like I'd pinned a bright ribbon to my own shirt. A teenager with purple headphones paused at the register and stared. "Those are pretty," she said, almost shy, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to comment on something gentle. "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it in a way that felt new. She ordered jasmine without me suggesting it, and for a second we shared the same small smile. It wasn't a big connection, not a grand friendship forming in the middle of a Tuesday. It was just a moment that said, I see you, and it doesn't hurt. The teapot kept nudging. Some suggestions were so small they were almost silly. Offer an extra napkin without apologizing. Tell someone their book choice looks good. Say you're glad they came in. Each time, my instinct was to retreat, to keep everything transactional and neat. But each time I tried anyway, and the world didn't collapse. Sometimes it even softened. A customer laughed when I described an oolong as patient. A tired nurse on her lunch break admitted she hadn't slept in days, and I slid her a note I hadn't planned to give away. Mr. Larkin looked up from his newspaper once and said, "This place helps," as if he'd been holding that sentence for a long time. Then came the hardest suggestion. It arrived on a morning when the light was gray and my thoughts were loud. Ask a regular how they're really doing, the teapot wrote, and then listen. I knew immediately who it meant. Mr. Larkin came in at 9, as he always did, newspaper tucked under his arm like armor. I poured his black coffee, set it down, and felt the question rise up like a sparrow in my chest. My voice wanted to hide, but I didn't let it. "How are you?" I asked. "Really?" The words hung between us, small and brave. He froze just for a beat. Then his shoulders dropped in a way that looked like surrender. He stared at the coffee, not at me, and said quietly, "My wife's been in the hospital." The truth landed heavy, and my first instinct was to fix it, to scramble for the right words, to make it lighter. But the teapot had said to listen, not to solve. So I stayed. I let the silence hold his sentence without rushing to patch it. "I'm sorry," I said, simple and steady, and he nodded like that was enough to keep breathing for one more moment. Then I refilled his cup without asking, and he didn't protest. After he sat down, I went back behind the counter, but it didn't feel like hiding this time. It felt like returning to a hearth after stepping outside and realizing the air won't hurt you. I watched the cafe with a new kind of attention, noticing how people carried their days like invisible bags. Later, I slipped a note into the chamomile tin that said, "You don't have to hold everything alone." I wasn't sure who would find it. Maybe Mr. Larkin. Maybe someone else who needed it more. That was the strangest part of all. The notes weren't just helping other people anymore. They were changing the shape of my own days, teaching me that warmth could be offered out loud and still feel safe. I realized I'd been treating the cafe like a hiding place when it was actually a bridge. a gentle little space where people came to be cared for in small, ordinary ways. And somehow, the teapot was rewiring my heart, one tiny act of bravery at a time, like stitching up old tears I'd stopped noticing. Some evenings, when I locked up and turned the chairs upside down, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason. Not because life had become perfect or simple, but because belonging no longer sounded like a loud word. It sounded like cups settling on saucers, like a laugh that didn't ask permission, like my own voice, finally learning it was allowed to exist in the room. The morning the cafe went quiet, it happened in one sharp moment. I was tying my apron, listening to the kettle begin its familiar hum, when the delivery box arrived with a dull thud by the door. I opened it, expecting the comforting scents I could name with my eyes closed, and instead, I found the wrong tins staring back at me. Bright fruit blends with cheerful names I didn't recognize. A hibiscus so bold it smelled like a summer I hadn't planned for. A peppermint sharp enough to make my nose tickle. And none of my most loved teas, the ones my regulars reached for like a soft blanket. No jasmine, no chamomile, no Earl Grey, no honeybush that tastes like golden afternoons. My stomach sank in that old meaning-heavy way that always came before I disappeared. My first instinct was the usual one. Apologize quickly, keep my head down, get through the day unnoticed, as if being small could make the problem smaller too. I checked the schedule taped under the counter and felt the panic sharpen. Today was the book club morning. Today was the day the office crowd came in early. Today was the day Mr. Larkin stayed longer, lingering near the window with his paper and his quiet grief. For a moment, I just stood there, hands hovering over the wrong tins. The cafe was quiet in that early way that usually calmed me, but this quiet felt different. It felt like an audience holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. My eyes drifted up to the top shelf without me deciding to look, to the jasmine tin that had become my private lighthouse, even when it was empty. I climbed the stool, pulled it down, and opened it with fingers that weren't quite steady. A note waited inside, folded neatly against the leaves that remained. I unfolded it right there, standing on the stool like a child sneaking cookies. Warmth isn't a menu item, it's a choice. Choose it anyway. It didn't fix the delivery mix-up. It didn't magically produce jasmine or chamomile, but it steadied me, like a hand placed gently between my shoulder blades. It reminded me that comfort wasn't only a flavor, and that I could still offer something kind. I set the note on the counter and looked at what I did have. A roasted barley tea that tasted like toasted bread. a mild oolong that smelled like orchids and patience, a cinnamon rooibos I'd been meaning to feature, warm and friendly as a sweater. An idea flickered, small but bright. If I couldn't serve the usual comfort, maybe I could make a new kind of comfort together. I wrote a sign in my best block letters and propped it near the register. Today only, tea tasting flights, 3 mini cups, vote for our surprise blend. When the first regular walked in and asked for jasmine, my old reflex rose up fast. The urge to apologize and hide behind the espresso machine. But I heard the teapot's note in my head like a warm hand on my back, and I held their gaze. "We had a delivery mix-up," I said, "but I made something fun instead. Want to try a tasting flight and help me pick a surprise blend for next week?" They blinked, then smiled. "Honestly, yes," they said, like I'd offered them a tiny adventure. And just like that, the cafe shifted, not into disappointment, but into curiosity. People leaned in together to compare flavors. Someone said the roasted barley tasted like childhood. Someone else insisted the cinnamon rooibos was basically a hug. The book club arrived and turned voting into a cheerful debate, slipping comment cards into a jar like ballots. By midday, the quiet I'd feared was gone. In its place was a soft, communal hum, laughter, warm opinions, and the gentle sound of people belonging to the same moment. Even Mr. Larkin cracked a small smile and said, "Surprise me," like he trusted I would. That evening, after I flipped the sign to closed, I didn't rush to leave. I lingered behind the counter, looking at the messy jar of votes, the empty sample cups, and the little vase of flowers catching the last of the sun. Pride rose up in me, gentle and unfamiliar, followed by something wet at the back of my eyes. I pressed my hand to my apron pocket and whispered, "Thank you," to the quiet cafe. Then I glanced up at the shelf and wondered, truly wondered, who or what had been cheering me on all along. That night, after the laughter and the voting jar, and the warm hum of people choosing to be kind together, I stayed behind. I cleaned slower than usual, like I was afraid to rinse the feeling away. When the last chair was up and the lights were low, I stood beneath the tea shelf and looked at the jasmine tin like it was a small moon I'd been orbiting. My chest felt full in a way that made me a little emotional, which annoyed me because I prefer feelings that behave. Still, I pulled a scrap of paper from the stack and held my pen as if it might tell the truth without me having to. I wrote a thank you first, because that part was easy, and because gratitude is safer than longing. Thank you for catching me on the days I would have disappeared. Thank you for helping me choose warmth when I thought I had none left to offer. Then I wrote the question I'd been afraid to ask, the one that felt too exposed to leave in plain ink. Why did this begin? And why does it feel like you know me? I read it back and almost crumpled it up out of habit. Instead, I folded it neatly, opened the jasmine tin, and tucked it into the leaves like a final offering. Good night, I whispered to an empty room, embarrassed by my own tenderness. I slept deeper than I had in weeks. In the morning, I walked to the cafe under pale winter sunlight, keys cold in my hand, heart strangely steady. Before I flipped the sign, I went straight to the shelf, because I'd learned some truths arrive before business hours. The jasmine tin waited, ordinary and impossible. I opened it and found a note folded on top, as if it had risen there overnight like steam. The handwriting was the same looping elegance, but the tone felt softer than usual, like a smile that didn't tease this time. This began because you began it. You left comfort in quiet places, and quiet places remember. You think you were hiding, but you were building warmth. Every gentle moment in this cafe lingers. The clink of cups, the extra napkin, the soft patience in your voice. Kindness echoes here, Amy. And sometimes it echoes back when you need it most. That was all. No grand explanation, no magician's flourish, just a truth that felt like a hand on my shoulder. I stared at my name until my eyes blurred. The cafe wasn't haunted by a person. It was filled with what we'd given away freely, tiny comforts collecting like sunlight in glass, waiting to be returned. Something in me unclenched, not all at once, but enough to breathe easier. I looked around at the counter, the window table, the little vase of flowers, and I realized I didn't want this warmth to stay hidden in a tin anymore. So I found a clean tin, rinsed it until it shone, and labeled it in careful marker. Take a note, leave a note. I set it beside the register with a stack of paper and a cup of pens, my hands trembling a little as if I were stepping into daylight. When I flipped the sign to open, the bell chimed like it always did, but it landed differently now. The first customer paused at the new tin and smiled. "What's this?" they asked, like the cafe was inviting them into something gentle. "It's for anyone," I said, and my voice didn't shrink. "Take one if you need one. Leave one if you can." They reached in, unfolded a note, and their face softened. Then they wrote something of their own and dropped it back in, and the tin made a small, bright sound as the paper fell. Behind the counter, I felt the cafe humming quietly around me, alive with shared comfort. I was still shy. I still loved the safety of steam and cups and small routines, but I wasn't alone in the quiet anymore, and as the door opened to a new day, I chose warmth on purpose, one tiny act of courage at a time.